It's your open source advocate, and I'm back with another video, and today I wanted to talk about a really cool application that I've used several times actually, and I've just never thought to do a video on it, but it's called draw.io. It's also known as diagram.net. So you can get it in different ways. They do have hosted versions. They always, have hosted versions that you can use, and that's what I'm logged into right now is their main site with diagram.net. And basically what it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a diagramming software that runs in the web browser. But you can self-host this as well if you want to, which is pretty cool. But in this case, I've just got an image of like a generic laptop, and it's feeding into a firewall, and that firewall is blocking that connection. And that's the idea that I'm trying to convey. So they always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I'm sure most of you guys wish that I would use a lot more pictures. But in this case, we're going to do a video. And we're going to talk about how to set up and install draw.io on your own system, and then even create a reverse proxy so you can have a correct URL to get to it from outside your network if you want to. So we're going to get into that right after this. I just want to say thank you so much to all of my patrons over at Patreon. I cannot tell you how much it means to me that you want to support me and the content that I create, and that you get something out of that content. I really, really appreciate it, and I want to say thank you again, really, for just coming on here and letting me know that what I'm doing makes a difference for you. I appreciate my subscribers over at YouTube. I appreciate everybody who sends me comments and messages and everything else that keeps me going. I really do appreciate that, and I just wanted to say thank you so very much to all of you. Now let's get started. Alright, so setting up draw.io really isn't that difficult. We can do it with Docker and Docker Compose. It's very straightforward, which I like. So if you go out to DockerHub, you have jgraph/draw.io, and I believe this is actually the official draw.io page, because I believe he also has the GitHub stuff set up for Docker draw.io, but he also has the jgraph just draw.io, the straight draw.io repository if you want to go check that out as well. It's an Apache version 2 open license, so you can go grab it and actually use it. So that's really cool. I really appreciate that he allows us to do this, but I'll have these links in the description and the show notes so you can kind of go check it out. He talks about several things that may be of interest. So if you want to set up your Let's Encrypt through the actual Compose application, you can do that. Here's the stuff that you'll need, but really what I like to do is just set up the application and then use a reverse proxy to get into my stuff inside of my network. So I can use Let's Encrypt for that, or I can use a Cloudflare certificate if I want to as well. So I've got several different ways to get a nice CA certificate that allows me to get back to my applications if I want to. So we're going to jump over here to this link, and again, I'll have this linked in the show notes in the description. And he's already got a really nice Compose file broken out for us. So I'm just going to copy this, and that's all you need to do is just copy that. And you're going to take that into whatever you prefer for your editor. I just like to use the terminal and Nano most of the time. It's really easy. But you can also do this in a Portainer stack if you want to. You can go and set this up using Visual Studio Code, basically running in the browser and accessing your system over SSH. However you like to do it, make it as simple for yourself as possible. The one thing I'll say is I'm logged into my server already that I want to use. I SSH'd in. And then I have this folder right in my base home directory called Docker, and I put everything that I run from Docker inside that folder. So I create a folder for each thing that I run. So in this case, I'll create a folder called draw, and I'll put _io. And I'm just going to cd into that, and it's an empty folder. So we're going to do nano, and we're going to call it docker-compose.yml. This is the file we're going to create. I'm going to use nano. It's just a terminal text editor. Again, you can use Vim, Emacs, VI, whatever you want to use, feel free to use that. If you want to use an actual graphical text editor, if you're running on a desktop and you know how to do that through SSH, or if you're running on the machine you're going to use, do that. That's fine. As long as it can do plain text, you'll be fine. No problems. So I'm just going to paste in that YAML code that we just copied, and I'm going to scroll back up to the top. Now, in YAML, you need to keep in mind that it is space sensitive. You do not want to use tabs. You want to use spaces. And when you indent, it's generally 2 spaces if you're having to do an indentation, and it just depends on what you're putting into the system. So if you're creating another container, you would put it at the same level as the draw.io container. In this case, draw.io is the only container that we're going to be using, so we should be set. So he's got it set as draw.io as the service name, and the image is called jgraph/draw.io. And then the container name is going to be called draw.io, which is great. That helps us identify it easily in Portainer and Docker PS, whatever we want to use. It's going to restart unless we stop it, which is great. So if you reboot your machine, it'll restart on its own. You don't have to go tell it to restart if you have to reboot the host machine for some reason. Our port mappings. So on the right side of port mappings, you never want to mess with this. Okay, you want to leave these the same because this is what the application is expecting. But on the left side, this is kind of like port forwarding. It's kind of like saying, hey, take this port and send it to that port. So we're saying take this port from the host on the left side and send it to the port from the container on the right side. So the container side you don't want to mess with unless you're a developer and you know what you're doing and you're making intentional changes in the code. Otherwise, leave it alone. But this left side we can change. And 8080 is a very popular port, so I don't want to use that. So I'm going to use 8381. You can pick any port that's open on your host machine. As long as it's an open port, it's fine. 8443 is also semi-popular because people don't want to use 443. So I'm going to change this to be 12443. You can again use any port that's open on your host. It doesn't matter. And then we've got environment variables. We've got our public DNS, which is domain. So this is if you want to get your actual Let's Encrypt certificate through this system. You would need to go and say, what is my public DNS? What's the organizational unit? All these things that you generally fill out to get a certificate, and this is going to generate a certificate for you. I don't want to do this, so I'm just going to say, get rid of these lines right here, and I do this with Control and K like king, and I get rid of all those lines. Now the health check, this is fine. It's just going to tell us, it's going to tell run a command shell. It's going to do a curl real quick to see if it's up. But we have to tell it what our domain is. So if we want to call this something, we have to tell it that. In this case, I'm just going to tell it 192.168.10.141. And that's the private IP inside my network. And I made this 8381, right? Yes. So we want to make sure that this port here matches our port up here. These two ports need to match. So make sure that those match. And then exit 1 is just an exit code if it can't do something. And then it's got every minute and 30 seconds, it will check to see if the system is up and running, and it'll time out in 10 seconds if it can't get a response. And it'll retry 5 times before it tells you, like, hey, this thing doesn't seem to be running. You might want to go check it. And then it'll, the state period is 10 seconds. So everything there should be good. Really, the only thing you might need to change is this IP address and these two ports. And then I removed all of the stuff for the environment variables because it's all stuff that he uses to basically set up certificates. So I'm going to hit Control O to save it, and then Enter to confirm, and then Control X to exit out of Nano. And I'm going to clear that out. Now I can run this with Docker-compose up and then -D, just like this, so that it runs as a daemon in the background. It's going to go out and pull down that image. It's going to take just a minute. Once it pulls everything down, it's going to extract it. And this is pretty small and pretty quick. And then we can do Docker-compose, and we're going to do logs, LOGS, and the space -F to see kind of what the logs look like for it starting up. And it looks like everything ran pretty good. I don't see any major errors jumping out at me here. So I think we're going to be okay. So I'm just going to hit Control-C to get out of the logs. I'm going to clear that out, and we're going to go to our browser. So let's go check out what we got in our browser. I'm going to open this up just on that IP address, which was 192. So this will be your IP address. Don't use mine unless you happen to use the same one, which would be weird. And then 8381 was the port. So I put in my private IP address and the port that I'm using. I'm just going to hit Enter. And you can see it starts coming up and it says Flowchart Maker. So in this case, I don't have all of the other things set up where I can use Google Drive or OneDrive. There are some files out there that let you do that. But in this case, I do want to just store things on my own server anyways. I don't really want to put them out there. So if you want to set up something where you're using like Nextcloud that you're also running on the server, then you can set up some shares and then set those shares as this drive that you're going to save them to. So I'm just going to put it as device, which is fine. And then it says create a new diagram or open existing diagram. So it just depends on what you pick as to how it goes, but I don't have any existing, so I'm going to say create a new diagram. And then it gives you all of these options, and it kind of shows you some different things that you can start with as far as templates. Are you trying to make an org chart? Are you trying to do a swim lane diagram? I mean, it just depends on what you're trying to do as to what you're going to kind of pick here. But there's different ones. So if you're doing something for engineering, you can pick over here on the left. And you can see how many different diagrams there are. So pretty cool. So you can jump in and really do some really cool stuff here. So if you're doing some kind of project plan, you can use something like a Pareto chart. A Gantt chart. You can make all kinds of flows and things like that that really show you a lot of cool information. So Draw.io, well, it looks very simple at the get-go. You can do a lot of really powerful stuff with it, which is great. So I'm just going to go back up here to the blank. I'm going to pick a blank diagram for now. We're just going to pick create. And now we've got our system set up and it's ready to go, and you can see that it's running. So I'm just going to drag some stuff out here to make sure that everything pulls on like I expect. And then I can take my arrows and point them where I want to. Awesome. We'll pull out a page here. And then we'll pull this guy. And we'll get the arrow, I hope. Alright, so we've got this running. It's running. Everything looks good. What I want to do now is go set up an actual domain name. So what you want to have in this case is something where you own the domain and you've gone to a registrar and basically purchased a domain name. So in my case, I own routemehome.org. So I'm going to go out to my domain registrar. I'm going to leave the page for now. And my domain registrar right now is Cloudflare. So when you're adding a new record, you want to create either an A record and you want to put in the name that you want to run. So if I was going to run this on routemehome.org, I might call it mydraw. I'd give it the name that I want, and then this is automatically going to add the .routemehome.org to it so that I get my mydraw.routemehome.org subdomain. And then I put in the public IP address that I want that to point to. Now this needs to be a public IP address, and unless you're using some kind of Cloudflare tunnel or some other kind of tunnel you set up between your registrar and your home. So in this case, I would absolutely need to use the IPv4 address. But since I already have it set up with my main record here, I can actually go down and create what they call a CNAME record. And again, it's just called mydraw. And then I'm just going to point that to the @ symbol, which means point that to the main domain record. So if this changes, this gets changed automatically with it, which really makes it easier for me to use. Now I'm going to untick this box as far as, the proxy, which is just the way that I like to do it, and I'm going to hit save. So this thing's going to update, and it should be pointing to my home IP address here pretty soon. And then I'm going to go, and I've got to open up my next tool, which is Nginx Proxy Manager. Now I have an entire video on a script that I wrote that will install Docker, Docker Compose, Nginx Proxy Manager, and Portainer if you want it. So it's a one-run script, and you get the one for your OS, tell it what your OS is actually, and then tell it what you want to install, and it'll try to go through that installation process for you just to make it really simple. So Nginx Proxy Manager is exactly what it sounds like. You create a proxy so that if it receives on your home address, so if my home address receives a request for mydraw.routemehome.org, it says, okay, where does that need to go? So I'm going to tell it needs to go to this IP because Nginx Proxy Manager and my host for my other machines are not running on the same machine. So I have to tell it the private IP address. And then I'm going to tell it, and it goes to this port, which I set up earlier, 8381. Block exploits, WebSocket support is fine. Okay, I've got WebSocket support set, so I'm going to jump over to the SSL tab. I'm going to go and pick my Cloudflare certificate in this case, just because it's easier, and this is going through Cloudflare. Makes it a little bit easier. And now if you don't have a Cloudflare certificate, that's okay. You would pick Request New SSL Certificate. Tick the box that says Force SSL. Make sure you have your email filled in, and then tick the box that says I agree with Let's Encrypt and hit save. What's going to happen is Let's Encrypt is then going to challenge and see if it can reach your site on that initial port. So if it would try to reach mydraw.routemehome.org. And once it got there, it would say, okay, here's a certificate, and it's going to issue the certificate, put everything in place for you. That's what Nginx Proxy Manager does. And then you're going to have HTTPS access to your system. So in my case, I'm going to switch this to Cloudflare. Yes. I'm going to hit save. And now I'm going to go open it up. I just click on it. There it is. It's going to go up and load up, and it's going to say, hey, where do you want to save this? And we can create a new diagram again. And there we go. We are set. Now you can zoom just the palette, and I'm just holding Control and then rolling up on the mouse wheel. But you can also zoom the controls. So if you move over on top of the control section, you can zoom the entire browser window. So it's kind of up to you as to what you need visually. But if you like kind of a smaller palette area, tools area, and then you want this larger area, to work on, you've got that. So that's pretty great. So if we do that, let's see, we can probably center this a little bit. Yeah, look at that. We got a lot of space now to work. We can see some cool stuff. We can drag these things out, and then we can create a flow chart, and we can drag some different things out here. I can grab this arrow and drag it out to the next thing in the link. And then same thing when I click on the guy, I get the arrow and I can drag it out to the next thing in the link. You've got these really great controls up here, so I'm going to zoom this up and I'm going to zoom this out to kind of keep it easier to see. And if you do arrange, so what you want to do is click and drag and highlight all these guys so that they're all showing like they're selected. You hit arrange, and now we can say vertical tree. And spanning, let's just do, or spacing, I don't know, let's do 20. I don't know how big we need the spacing. 30 is probably fine. I don't know what the spacing is, so let's see what it does. There we go. So it takes all of your objects and it rearranges them and it tries to make some kind of sense out of what it's doing. And so I've got a big mess of stuff here. Again, if we do layout, let's try organic. And you see how it added a page automatically here on the other side of this little dotted line. So when it went outside of the screen space, it created that. Here, this looks a little bit more readable to me. The problem is we don't have an actual starting space because we looped things back around to each other. But adding in one more thing might make it make more sense. Who knows? You know, if we just said here, and we took that, and we said this goes here. Maybe that would make it make more sense. So now if we highlight everything, I think you have to surround them all. There we go. Then we do arrange, and then again we do layout, and we do organic. Yeah, so now you can see that it's got a much better kind of flow layout here. We can drag this over. So there, so yeah, so it starts here and it goes here and it can go to this guy and it can go here and then it could go back here and back around and kind of create this loop. But then it also goes here and it can create a loop this way, and then once finally it can go out to this side. So we've created this flow and we've let the system kind of take that and try to make sense of it. So if you have a starting point and an ending point, even if you have loops and different things that go around, it does pretty well in kind of trying to lay that back out for you and make sense out of it so that you can have somebody else follow along with you with how things might work. And with large applications and programs and thoughts and thought processes and workflows, that's really a tremendous tool to have in this day and age. So I think this is really great. And there's some other cool diagramming tools that I know of that are open source. So if you guys would like to see some of those, let me know. But I thought Draw.io is super great. It has a very easy to use and adapt interface in my opinion. But it can do some really powerful stuff. So I really like that. Now, whenever you are finished making something, you see this little orange thing. It's telling you like, hey, you've made changes, but you haven't saved them. So you haven't saved this thing yet, and you've got this orange thing that's telling you like, hey, you've made a bunch of changes, or you've made a change and you haven't saved it. So you can click right here, and it's going to say, okay, you've saved it. It's not titled yet. So you might want to click up here and give it a title that makes sense. So my first flow, whatever makes you happy. It's going to be an XML file basically for draw.io. You can do that, or you can save it as a PNG, SVG, HTML, or XML. It's very much up to you. The XML file in this case is the .draw.io file, so I'm going to save it like that. I'm just going to hit that, and then I'm going to go and make a change here, and then you'll see this turns orange. So as soon as you move anything or add anything or do anything, it's going to change. Now you can double click in these and you can give them names. So start, second. So we've made some changes. Now we've got some labels on here to make the flow even easier to understand. And right here we can just hit save again, and it downloads it for us. So once it's got that same name, you may have multiple copies, but just get the latest copy that you downloaded and you're good to go. So now if I want to close this out, I'm going to say it's fine, leave the page. It's going to warn you before you leave the page. I'm going to go back into it, and I'm going to tell it I want to open an existing one. So it's going to bring up my browser here. I'm going to go to downloads, and I should have my first flow somewhere here, right here. It's going to open that up, and I can start right where I left off, and I can make changes and do the things that I need to do. So pretty easy, pretty great. All works through your browser. You can run it locally. You can run it on a VPS. You can kind of run it however you want to, but it's a totally self-hosted, open source solution for flow charting, and you saw all of the different options that you had out there for doing some really cool stuff. So I really like this. I hope that you will too, and I hope it'll be helpful for you. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, tell your friends about it so they can come along on the journey with us, and I'll talk to you next time.